There we go. All right. Welcome everyone to Making the Familiar Strange. It's great to see such a wonderful showing for Lisa's session today. My name is Ali Zimmermoss, and I'm Tri-Faith's Curriculum and Volunteer Specialist. In this program, I'm here to welcome you, to remind you of how Making the Familiar Strange works, and to assist our special guests in whatever ways they prefer. So remember that the goals of our program here are to take a look at Abrahamic stories together and to take on new perspectives by looking at familiar or sometimes less familiar stories with fresh eyes and with new points of view. Today, we're very excited to welcome Lisa Lewis from Temple, Israel, who will share her perspective on the story of Abraham's near sacrifice of his son, Isaac, from the Torah. But first, remember that we have some ground rules just to keep everyone on the same page. And those are to be respectful, to reconsider what assumptions you might be bringing to this story, and to speak from your own point of view rather than on behalf of a larger group of people. So we always encourage to use I statements rather than we. And also keep in mind that when we look at these nuanced stories, we're all trying to hear and consider a new perspective that might differ from our own, and it's totally fine if we don't completely agree with it, or if it's different from what our tradition says. We're just here to hear someone else's perspective. So for announcements, next month, we're going to be taking a pause on Making the Familiar Strange to focus Tri-Faith's efforts on a very special event called United We Walk, where you'll be invited to come to the Tri-Faith Commons on Sunday, September 11th, from 3 p.m. until 6 p.m. for a walk, open houses, and a bunch of different activities. But for today, as I mentioned, we'll be hearing Lisa's perspective on this story from the Hebrew Bible. She's asked me to keep an eye on the chat for her, to voice any questions or comments that you post in there while or when she reaches a natural pause in the comments that she's making on the story. And if you'd like to unmute yourself to voice your own question or comment as she's speaking, she's requested that you raise your hand or put a note in the chat just so that we can give you that opportunity when there's a good chance for that. And when Lisa opens up opportunities for discussion, please feel free to participate in whatever way is most comfortable to you, whether that's through the chat or unmuting yourself. Whatever your preferences are, please don't hesitate to get involved in the conversation. We love to hear everybody's different voices and opinions and thoughts on all of these things. So Lisa, thank you for joining us today. I'll hand things over to you to introduce yourself and to get us started.
Thank you, Ali. I will start out by just saying that I'm Lisa Lewis, and you notice if anybody read the little curricula vitae on the program, it does not say that I am a Judaic, Hebraic, biblical or Talmudic scholar. So I am not. I'm also not a Zoom specialist. So we may have some issues here too. But anyway, this is really just my opinion. And actually what I did prior to this was studied with Rabbi Dina Berezin, and she was extremely helpful. So this isn't just my off-the-cuff opinion. I really did a little research and studying to get the Jewish perspective. But again, I'm not a Judaic scholar. So I often say I practice more the fiddler on the roof type of Judaism, which is that, you know, a little of this, a little of that. I question things, debate. A lot of fiddler on the roof is arguing with God, which I probably tend to do because I don't know that I necessarily believe in a God, but anyway, that's kind of part of being Jewish too. If anyone remembers reading Fiddler on the Roof or you know, attending the play, he would always say on one hand something, and then he'd say, but on the other hand, And then it was on the other hand, and eventually he'd say, wait, there are only two hands. There's not another hand. And with a good healthy mix of tradition too. So that's a little bit what I'll talk about. I'm not just going to focus primarily on the Binding of Isaac, but a little bit of how the story is introduced in our custom. So first of all, I think what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about the Jewish high holidays, because that's when the Binding of Isaac is read in our services. An interesting thing is that the Jewish high holidays, or the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and those of you who are Jewish are probably know all this, and those of you who aren't probably know a lot of this too. But they always occur. The holiday of Rosh Hashanah is the Jewish New Year, and it doesn't involve hats and horns and champagne. It really is a holiday of introspection. There's a lot of joy that comes with it, because it is a new year, and we greet new life, and there's happiness. But it concludes 10 days later with the holiday of Yom Kippur, which is a holiday, a day of atonement, and actually a fast day. So this year, Rosh Hashanah occurs, I think it's September 25th is the first day. And all Jewish holidays begin the night before. You may or may not know that, but they always begin the night before. So essentially, or maybe it's the 26th. I don't know, I'll have to look at my calendar again, but it's 26th and 27th. The holiday begins the night before on the 25th. The same with Yom Kippur, which is 10 days later. And traditionally, or always, the story of the Binding of Isaac is read at synagogue during Rosh Hashanah services. And what I found kind of interesting was that this doesn't come up, well, I'll back up a little bit. If you may know, the Torah is the first 5 books of the Bible, and it's read sequentially during the year in synagogues. And the story of the Binding of Isaac doesn't necessarily, it doesn't come up at the same time as Rosh Hashanah, which is the first day of the Hebrew month of Tishrei. So it's actually a special reading that comes about on Rosh Hashanah. And what I find kind of interesting is that and one of the questions that we might want to discuss is, why is it brought up? Why is it brought into the practice at Rosh Hashanah time? Why do we read it at that time, especially? And I think that's part of the mystery, I guess, and the mystique of the story. The other thing is that just a little background here. As a child, I grew up in Beth Israel Synagogue, which was the Orthodox synagogue, and I have been a member of Temple Israel for like over 40 years, but as a child, we would always go, my cousin, I think, who's on the Zoom too, we'd go to the synagogue, we'd go to services, we sit there for a while, we might listen to the story, we go out and we chat with our friends. So the holiday was really just an opportunity to be out of school for a couple of days. And then again, on Yom Kippur, we got to take a day off of school, and all the other kids were jealous. But as I got older, it became much more serious and introspective type holiday. And at Temple Israel, what we do is we actually start the holiday of Rosh Hashanah the month before. So it really it begins in the month of Elul, which is the month before Rosh Hashanah, which starts at about the end of this month. And it's just a time when we need to kind of rethink, decide how we're going to live our lives, how we have lived our lives, if we're going to make changes. I suppose that's a lot like the secular New Year too, but there's a lot of introspection. And so then we arrive at synagogue on Rosh Hashanah, and the story of the Binding of Isaac is read. So what I'm going to do is, now this is the part where I'm also not necessarily skilled. It's the Zoom situation. So I'm going to try to share the screen, and we can read through the Binding of Isaac. And I'm just going to tell everyone, this is, as Allie mentioned, this is participatory. So hang on, let me get to this. And let me see if I can find it. Here, I think I've got it. Okay, let's see. Share. Ta-da! Okay, wow. I'm take it back. I'm a Zoom expert now. All right. Now let me just get some of this stuff out of here. Shoot. Okay. I don't want to see that. I don't want to see this. Okay. Okay. Hang on. Okay. There we go. Now, can everybody see Genesis 22? Nod your heads. Okay, great. Okay, super. Well, what I think I'm going to do is, and this is actually the story of the binding of Isaac. And so what I think I'll do is I'll start reading, because usually if we say, you know, oh, who wants to participate? Nobody does. So we'll do this. And I promise you that I will not make anybody read Hebrew, including me. There are a few words I know, but that's about it. So don't worry, you can read the English. But let me just start out with paragraph, and it is paragraph 1. And it starts out, and I'll interrupt myself too, as I often do, but it says, sometime afterward, God put Abraham to the test, saying to him, Abraham. He answered, here I am. So just as a little background, sometime afterwards means chapter 21 covered a lot of ground. It was the birth of Isaac. Everybody got excited. Sarah was 90 years old. Abraham, I think, was about 100. So, you know, it was a very exciting time. They talked about Isaac being weaned. They celebrated. Included in that paragraph was the time when Sarah made Abraham send his slave woman Hagar and her son Ishmael out of the house and into travel. And God said to Abraham, it's okay, I'll take care of them too. So anyway, there's a whole background there, and included in this is also a segment where Abraham made a pact with a man named Abimelech, and he got to stay. I mean, there's a whole bunch of story there, and he got to stay in Beersheba. Then we get to Genesis 22, which is certainly a smaller story, but that's where it says sometime afterwards. So you don't know at this point how old Isaac is. You just know he was born in the last chapter, and it says sometime afterward, God put Abraham to the test, saying, Abraham, and he answered, here I am. And that's a pretty significant thing. If you can see, I suppose you can see the pointer. This word is hineni, which means here I am, or I am here. And that comes up 2 other times in this reading. However, at one point, actually, the translation isn't here I am, which is the only thing I found biblical here. But anyway, so Abraham says, here I am. That always puzzled me, because I thought, why did he have to say that? And doesn't God know where everybody is? But anyway, okay, so I'll read a couple more paragraphs so you don't have to feel like you have to do that. But next, take your son, your favored one, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the heights that I will point out to you. No argument here, just so early next morning, Abraham saddled his ass and took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. He split the wood for the burnt offering, and he set out for the place of which God had told him. So does somebody else want to read a couple more paragraphs? Anybody interested in doing that? Don't all shout out here.
Sure, I will.
Okay, who's I?
Abdul.
Oh, Abdul, hi. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, on the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his servants, you stay here with the ass. The boy and I will go up there. We will worship and we will return to you. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and put it on his son Isaac. He himself took the firestone and the knife, and the 2 walked off together.
Very good. Now, does somebody else, thank you very much. Does somebody want to read, let's see, which paragraph is this? We're on to 8 or 7, I guess. Does somebody want to read that one?
I'll read it.
Okay.
This is Gloria. Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Then Isaac said to his father Abraham, Father. And he answered, yes, my son. And he said, here are the firestone and the wood, but where is the sheep for the burnt offering? And Abraham said,
Stop right there. You
yes.
See where it says, yes, my son. That actually is the word, if you see where the pointer is, it says hineni. So most of the time that's translated as Hineni, here I am, which is kind of interesting because it's repetitive of what Abraham answered to God. But here the translation is, yes, my son. I don't think that's as good as it could be, but go on. Thank you very much. Thanks for letting me interrupt. Go ahead.
Abraham said, it is God who will see us to the sheep for this burnt offering, my son. And the two of them walked on together. They arrived at the place of which God had told him. Abraham built an altar there. He laid out the wood. He bound his son Isaac. He laid him on the altar on top of the wood. And Abraham picked up the knife to slay his son.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Stop right there. So, so far we're reading this, there's not a peep out of Isaac, is there? Not a protest, nothing. He just lays down, and Abraham picks up the knife to slay his son. And okay, I'll just read the next one because there's a Hebrew word in there. It says, then a messenger of Adonai, and that just means God. That's how it's translated. It's translated as God. Then a messenger of Adonai called to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. And he answered again. What did he answer? Hineni, here I am. Do not raise your hand against the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your favored one, from me. When Abraham looked up, his eye fell upon a ram caught in the thicket by its horns. So Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering in place of his son. And just for your information, there is a tradition that the horns from the ram were used as shofars. And if you've heard the word shofar, that's the ram's horn that is blown at Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, at the end of Yom Kippur. There's an actual blowing of the ram's horn, and it's significant because this is what Abraham, where he got the ram's horn, or where the ram's horn came from. And Abraham named the site Adonai Yireh, whence the present saying, on the mount of Adonai there is vision. The messenger of Adonai called to Abraham a second time from heaven. Does somebody want to read this? There's a little Hebrew, but it's just Adonai. It's easy to say.
I will.
Okay.
And said, are we on and said?
Yes, we are and said. I'm sorry.
Okay. By myself, I swear, Adonai declares, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your favored one, I will bestow my blessing upon you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars of heaven and the sands on the seashore, and your descendants shall seize the gates of their foes. All the nations of the earth shall bless themselves by your descendants, because you have obeyed my command. Abraham then returned to his servants, and they departed together for Beersheba, and Abraham stayed at Beersheba.
And that's the end. Thank you very, very much, participants. And so it's only, 19 paragraphs, and it ends where he goes away. And the fascinating thing about the story, or there are many, many, many fascinating things and many interpretations of the story, but one of the fascinating things is, and this is the question, I guess, comes up, like, how could God have asked Abraham to do this? And how could Abraham have done this and almost killed his own son? And of course, as children or even as adults, we read this, and it's a really horrifying story. Does everyone else find it as horrifying as I do? It's a scary story, because theoretically, the person that a child trusts is going to sacrifice him and picks up a knife to do that. So the question comes up is that one of the many questions that comes up is what is this? What is the purpose? Why is this read? Why did this happen? What is this? I'll move this down. We don't want to hear all this stuff, but does anyone have any thoughts on this? Is this Abraham's faith? What is it testing? Does anyone have any thoughts on that? You want to just wave your hand?
Yeah. Oh, it's testing his obedience.
His obedience. Okay, that's a thought. Yeah, Hamza.
Sacrifice. What are you willing to sacrifice for God? And will it be the ultimate sacrifice of offspring, of, lineage, of legacy? How much are you willing to give for God? That's what I believe from my interpretation in the translation.
What about his? One of the thoughts too is whether it challenges Abraham's. And thank you very much for your.
I wanted to add something.
Sure.
Just, are you willing to give back to God what God has given you?
But why would God want that? Why would he want that?
I think for the same reason he wants our tithes. Of course, that doesn't equate to the life of one's favorite child, but sometimes God gives us something solely for the purpose of us giving it back to him, returning it to him. And I think it is, as was said earlier, it's a test.
Mm-hmm.
Test of our faith and test of our obedience.
Yeah, and that's exactly. It starts out and it says it's a test, and it's often said that it's a test of Abraham's faith. But I've, in the reading that I did, and this is kind of interesting. It's as I see it. At one point, you think, okay, it's Abraham's faith that God is going to save his son, that God is going to intervene. He has faith in God that God will do the right thing. But is that the same as belief? And I read some interesting things about this. There's and I'm just going to kind of quote this because I think it's pretty good. Faith is different from belief. I just read, let's see, it's Rabbi Naftali Brower is his name. He's at Tufts Hillel now. He's from, originally he was from the United States and he was in England. And he says, faith is not the same as belief. If Abraham believed that God would stop him from sacrificing Isaac, it wouldn't have been a test because he would just have believed that God was going to do this. It's a test because this certain belief is absent. All Abraham has to go on is faith. Too often we confuse belief with faith. While belief is comforting, faith requires a great emotional and mental leap beyond one's comfort zone. And I think that's really interesting. It's a difference between just believing in something blindly that it's going to happen and having faith that that you have to make, you yourself have to make that leap. You're not just waiting for somebody else to do it. Another approach to this is pretty interesting too. First of all, I have to tell you that the binding of Isaac in Hebrew is called the Akedah. It means binding, but that's what it's referred to as, the Akedah. And there's one point, in fact, this rabbi has quoted Rashi. Rashi was a scholar in France, I think, and he lived between 1040 and 1105. What I always think fascinating is that they actually have the date of his birth and the date of his death. I mean, I can't remember my kid's birth date sometimes, but anyway, 1040 to 1105, and I think it was February 26th or something like that in 1105 that he died. And he was a famous Jewish scholar. He was a rabbi. Rashi was not his name. They were initials for his full name. But he points out that God never asked Abraham to sacrifice his son. This is interesting. It says the term the Bible ascribes to God is viha alenu, which means to offer him up. Now, if we go back and look at, let me see, which paragraph is it? Paragraph 2. I'm going to find it here. And for all you Judaic scholars who are sitting in the audience, let's see. The word is, it says, wait a minute, hang on. I think it's paragraph 2, just a sec. Yeah, here I am. Take your son, your favored one, whom you love, go to land of Moriah, and it says, offer him there as a burnt offering. It doesn't say slaughter him, slay him, kill him. It says offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the heights that I will point to you. And the word for offer is this word right here. It's vihaleinu. I'm sorry, just a minute. It is vihalehu, which means offer him up. It says the Bible deliberately does not use the term shachatenu, which means slaughter him. So that this interpretation is that, and what I think is fascinating, is that Abraham just misunderstood God. He didn't say to kill him. He just said offer him up, which he did, and he actually put Isaac on the board, on the the board, I guess, tied him on, and was about to kill him when there was an intervention. All of a sudden, wait, Abraham, don't. And it's interesting because the messenger didn't say stop. He said, Abraham, Abraham. And Abraham goes, yeah, I'm here. What do you want? And then he stopped. He didn't commit the horrible task of slaying his son. So that was an interesting, of course, Judaism always has different discussions of things, but that was kind of an interesting interpretation, and one that I thought was fascinating to see that the word is not slay him, it's just offer him up as a burnt offering. It doesn't say to burn him, it doesn't say to strangle him, it just says offer him. And then, of course, as we know from the story, God provides by providing the ram. So so that was one of the things that I thought was a fascinating approach to this. So I'm just, do you think that Abraham passed the test then, or did he fail the test? Anyone have any thoughts on that?
I say he passed the test because later in the passage, it describes the covenant between God and the Jewish people. And that covenant is what all three religions, then we grow from that. So the covenant, which is unique between God and his people, that is a solemn and binding agreement. And that, so we were talking, you're asked about Abraham. He needs to bring something to the table. Sorry for the pun when it comes to the altar, but this is an agreement, a covenant that is unlike anything that's ever happened. And so something significant from the human side needs to happen. And that is, I'm willing to offer my son. That's how committed I am to this covenant. Now, he doesn't use the word covenant, but that's what is described later, is when the covenant is defined. And because of you were willing to do that, then we have this covenant.
Well, and thank you for that. That's interesting. That's a good approach. That's a good statement. Does anyone think he failed the test, other than Rabbi Berezin, who's not here with us? I don't think, but I don't know. Maybe she is. Actually,
I always wondered why he never argued about it. I mean, of all things, not to argue with God about, that's the one he chooses to remain silent on.
You know, one thing right at the beginning that shows Abraham's faith is he says, we will return. He didn't say, I will return. He said, we.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, he anticipated his son would return.
Right. Or maybe he was just saying that to so that he wouldn't upset his servants too, and say, well, I'm going to return, but my son's going to stay up there, slaughtered on a bench. But that's an interesting, a good way to interpret it. I hear what you say. But then at the very end, it's interesting because at the very end of this, let's find this here. It says, and this was, I've heard different interpretations of this. It says, oops, here it is. Abraham then returned to his servants, and they departed together for Beersheba, and Abraham stayed in Beersheba. Doesn't say anything about Isaac there, does it? So I've heard some interpretations in which they say he actually may have slaughtered his son, may have slain his son, and that's why he didn't return. Of course, then the argument to that is, but Isaac went on to reproduce more children. However, there's always the question of how old Isaac was when this occurred. Originally, it was, well, there's a discussion, this is the Fiddler on the Roof discussion. There's always a discussion. Some say he was just a young man, like a preteen or a teenager. He was 13. It doesn't say. And others say he was 37. And how they came to that year, that age, is because right after this, Sarah dies. and she was supposedly 127.
That's the point.
Isaac was born when she was 90, so he would be 37. That meant that he was already a man. Yet God refers to him as the boy. He says, do not slay your boy. Or yeah, he says, well, do not withhold, yes, you withheld your, since he refers to him as a boy. So I guess the question is he, yeah, do not raise your hand against the boy or do anything for him, to him. So then the question is, was he a young man? Was he an older, I mean, at 37, you're pretty old by that time. You have children and everything. So that raises a lot of other questions, but that's an interesting point that he told his servants he was going to, that they would return, which kind of enhances the idea of his faith.
But Lisa, if it's an okay moment, we have a few things in the chat that I want to make sure we don't miss. Is it okay to interrupt you?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So the first comment comes from Gene Gordon, who notes that Abraham didn't even question it. He proceeded as instructed. And then we've got a comment from Joseph Pinson, who said, in response to your question about whether he passed or failed the test, Joseph said he passed the faith test and failed the parent test. And then we've got a comment from Jeremy Fricky, who says, I find it interesting, and I believe I am correct in this, but could be convinced otherwise. God does the commanding, but an angel of God is sent to stop him from harming Isaac. I'm not sure what or if that means anything, but still interesting to me. So we've got those three things that were put in the chat that I wanted to give voice to.
Well, and I love them because the thing about the argument is so interesting. I think it was Jean who mentioned that earlier. In some of the reading I did, God knows I didn't know this myself. Abraham was, of course, the one who said to God, when he was talking about destroying Sodom and Gomorrah, he said, well, wait, what if there's one good person? What, and so he argues with God then, but then when it comes to sacrificing his own son, not a word, not an argument. So that is certainly an interesting point, and one that I'm sure I and many people who are parents are going, I can't imagine that. And think how frightening that is for kids too, to think that the one person that they love, that they trust that will protect them isn't protecting them. So that was an interesting point. And I like Joseph. He passed the faith test, failed the parent test. And that's kind of how Rabbi Berezin, my mentor, my scholar, my confidant here, one of the things that she was saying is that she says, if anyone questions that, you haven't seen me. So you give Rabbi Berezin a call if you want to chat with her about failing the test. But that is an excellent argument. And what was the third thing? I already forgot that. I feel like I'm taking a mini mental and I failed. But the third, what was the third point, Allie?
Yeah, that was Jeremy's comment about God doing the commanding, but an angel of God is sent to stop him from harming Isaac. It looks like Jeremy was noting that contrast. Oh, and it looks like we just got another thing added to the chat where Joseph Rafik says, I wonder if Abraham shared his going to the mountain with Isaac and with Sarah.
Well, that's an interesting point, and I think that distinguishes a lot from the Muslim perspective, which is that, if I understand, because somebody made an excellent presentation a few months ago, and at that point, Ishmael knew that his father was going to take him up there. And in this point, I don't think that was shared with Isaac. In fact, Isaac was the one who said, well, but where's the ram? Where's the lamb? Where is it? So I don't know that he knew that. And that's a good question about Sarah too, because some of the readings I've done have said that, Sarah may have been so upset. You don't see any reference anywhere else about Sarah, weighing in on this, Abraham talking to Sarah. She doesn't come up anywhere except that the next chapter, I think, is about Sarah, the life and death of Sarah. So she died right after this. So she may have been so distraught. Who knows if he brought this up at all. But it seems to me that he did not, that he was not going to tell his son, guess what, I'm going to sacrifice you for God. And then I love the part about the fact that he and have misinterpreted the whole thing, and was just supposed to see if he would go so far with it. But Jeremy, the part about where with the angels coming down, this line here, it says, "By myself I swear," Adonai declares. What I've read about that, and it's kind of like when we say, "Oh my God," well, actually God himself said, "Oh my God." So that's what the angel is saying, is that God himself said, "Oh my God, because you've done this, and you have not withheld your son, your favored one, I will bestow upon you all these blessings." So an interesting point, but yeah, I love that. And the other thing is just the idea of, blind faith. I mean, we get upset when we hear people who murder 6 people and they say, "Well, God told me to do that." Well, here's this man who's going to murder his son because God told him to do that. That's horrible. It's hard to explain this for kids. I remember Rabbi Azra one time said to me, "The Bible is not for children." It's not. And this is really one of those stories that is very stress inducing, I think, for kids. One of the rabbis, I think it was the Rabbi Brower, Rabbi Romain, who said, one of the big problems here is that the effect on children. He said, for very young children, it can be very frightening. It effectively says that one of the 2 people you trust most to look after you might not only be willing to kill you, but also receives praise from God for nearly doing it. Oof. Anne, you have a question.
Comment. Excuse me. Some of the Bible, I've always felt this way when I read certain things in it, I kind of look at them a little bit like they might be a parable.
Mhm.
And if this were a parable, and I think it must be, because a woman 90 doesn't have a baby, what realistic story would that be? Would that be that we love our child, and like you said, you take it and you think, "I'm so mad at this child, I might kill it, but I won't"? What if you believe that this is a parable, what would it be a parable to?
I hear what you're saying. I think what it is a lesson for discussion is what it is. And I'm not quite, sorry, I don't understand the question that well, but I understand what you're saying is that, why are we learning this? It's kind of like, why are we knowing this? I mean, what's the point of learning this? What is it teaching us, or teaching you or me? So that's exactly what, I don't know if.
Yeah, well, it's a hard question to ask.
Sure.
Because we see, let's look at this like it's a story. Like you said, we have chapter 1, 2. Okay, this is what we're learning.
Mhm.
And what we have learned for most of our lives. But what does this really say? If we don't think that these exact things happened, what's it trying to tell us? What is the Bible trying to tell us?
Right. Because many of us don't necessarily believe this to be truthful. It's a story to help us. So that's exactly
Yes.
what the question is what is it
Yes.
teaching us, and why are we reading it on Rosh Hashanah? Which is kind of part of that question, is why are we reading it then? What are we thinking about? Are we thinking about how we need to revere our families and our children, and we need to listen to God, but we also need to, there are times when we may not do what God wants us to do, or what we think God would want us to do. There are times when we have to do our own thing. Do you think that? I mean, that's what I'm thinking too, that's what it teaches us, is to think, to question, not to be, I think Jean was the one who brought up, just why didn't he say anything? Why didn't he question this? Throughout the Torah, people are always arguing with God. They're always questioning. They're always, and why in this case didn't it happen? So no, I hear what you're saying, Anne, and I think that brings up this question that we always have to think about at this time of year. Maybe there are things that we need to question. Maybe we know we shouldn't just blindly follow a suggestion, even if we think it's divinely inspired. We need to question everything, and we need to make our own decisions on what's best for us. And so that's kind of what we do for between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. We go through a kind of a self-evaluation between those two holidays. I wanted to bring up a couple other things before I kind of go into that too. One was that Elie Wiesel was, of course, most people know who he is. We talked about brinkmanship with God. And I think that's kind of what you might be referring to a little bit, Anne, is just, this isn't just following God. There's a brinkmanship, where this is a battle that we have. And I shouldn't say we, but that I think I have. Not that I necessarily believe that God is telling me to do stuff, but it's your own personal battle with your own values, and what do you value, and how do you think things through before you make crazy decisions. So not that we have those kinds of decisions hopefully ever to make, but anyway, it's an interesting story or parable, as you say, to think about and to certainly read at this time of year. And again, it's very distressing. One of the things Rabbi Berezin and I discussed was what was sacrificed at this. I mean, Isaac was not personally sacrificed, but does anyone have any thoughts on what was sacrificed? Was it innocence? Isaac's relationship with his parents? I think that, or his father at least, I think that was maybe sacrificed. Who knows?
The trust of his father,
Mm-hmm.
the trust of his father to him.
And he to his father. I mean, how can you trust your father if he's going to put you on?
No, that's what I mean. You
Yeah,
can't. How could he ever trust his father again?
Was that may have been a sacrifice, and his loss of innocence. If he was this young child, possibly, who trusted and did what his dad said, and all of a sudden, poof, my dad's going to put me on a plank.
It looks like Gary wants to chime in.
Gary, you need to unmute.
What I find amazing is, as we said, Abraham was about 100 years old, and Isaac undoubtedly could have overpowered him. And I mean, I was just thinking if my dad tried to bind me, there would be some resistance, but there was no resistance in that. He just accepted it.
Exactly. Yeah. That's very interesting too. Yes, exactly. So anyway, it's such an interesting story, and it's always fascinated me and kind of disturbed me. And I think that's part of what the holiday, the Jewish holiday of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is supposed to do. It sort of disturbs us and makes us think. And actually, the Day of Atonement is Yom Kippur, and that's the when I say the serious holiday, that's the one where we don't eat apples and honey. I don't bake a honey cake. It's a day of fasting and real reflection. And the Jewish take on this is that this is what I always find fascinating, is that God has a book of life, a book and a book of death. Who's going to live and who's going to die. And so you go through this asking God to write you in the book of life. And as a child, of course, I had this vision of this guy with a gigantic book, and he's writing the names. You want to go, put me in there. But theoretically, the way to continue to be written in the book of life is that you continue to do good deeds. You help people. You are good to people. You're just a good human being. I think that is what how you get written into the book of life, and it's really important. And for those of you who may not know, Yom Kippur is, as I said, a day of atonement, when you atone for anything you've done to violate God. However, before you do that, you have to atone to your fellow man, if you've done anything to offend them, if you've done anything to harm them. So, I sometimes say to my friends, okay, if I've done anything to harm you, please forgive me. I'm so sorry I did that. Just to kind of get things on the right path again. And also the other thing I do, see, like, I'm never too sure about the religious part of this, but I hedge my bets. So I always bake honey cakes for my friends. And so if you become a good friend of mine, you get one of my honey cakes. I used to do it when I was at the courthouse, or when I was an attorney. I baked them for the people at the courthouse, and they'd always say to me, "Oh, it must be Rosh Hashanah. It must be Yom Kippur. It's time for Rosh Hashanah. It's time for a honey cake." So that's just to make sure. I bake them for my cousin when we break the fast, and then at the end of Yom Kippur, which is this year, it is October. I think it's October 4th. By the way, the year is 57. Let me just check. It's 5783, I think. Anyone correct me on that? Yeah, 5783. That's what we're going to 783. I don't know if you recall, David Letterman used to always come out. When he had a show on television, he'd always say, "Wish everyone a happy new year." And then he'd say, it's 5783. He says, "I'm still writing 5782 on my checks." So just, I always think about that when I come up to the year 57, the next year. But anyway, just had a couple little conclusionary things.
Well, before you get to your conclusion,
yeah.
do you mind if we've got a couple of things from the chat? All right, and then it looks like maybe Abdul might also want to throw in a comment, but it looks like the one that was closest to what you were just talking about, Abdul had put in the chat, "Lisa, can I order one of your honey cakes for Ramadan? Don't want to eat dates." So I just thought that was a fun one to mention first. But,
thank you.
another comment that we got, Joseph Pinson wrote in the chat, building on a previous comment, maybe the binding was a test of Isaac more than Abraham. And then Karen Euler also had a comment in the chat where she said one of the commentaries on Isaac's lack of resistance felt that he didn't resist because he thought it was symbolic. It wasn't until his father marked the spot for the knife cut and then lifted the knife that Isaac called out. Wow. That's an interesting take. I didn't realize he had marked the spot for the knife. Woohoo. I'll have to read that. I really would love to continue on this. I had a couple questions too. One was if anyone wants to talk a little bit about the Christian take on this. Is there a difference in what you're taught in Christianity about the binding of Isaac? Nothing. Somebody asked me about.
Sure, I will.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I have always been taught that this is kind of a I don't know what it's called, a foreshadowing or a precursor to Jesus's carrying the cross to his own death, where Isaac has to carry the wood on his back all the way up and then willingly submits to die on wood. Not that it takes away from the actual thing that happened, but it just is a link to better understanding the will of the Father and the Son accepting it. A way to help you understand is to kind of make a parallel. So that's the way I was taught.
Thank you very much. That is an interesting aspect, and I have heard that too, is that it's sort of a precursor to that, at least to explain that as sacrifice of a son, and Isaac essentially is one of God's children. So he allows him to be sacrificed, or he comes very close. So it's that's an interesting aspect, and I have heard that as well. And I think I mentioned something about Ishmael as well. I was just going to conclude with a couple things, but I'd love to hear any more comments that you have. I don't have anything really exciting to conclude with other than.
Can I just ask, what is Ishmael mentioned in this chapter?
He's mentioned in the chapter before, and actually I didn't see the name Ishmael, but it's the son of Hagar. So not in this chapter, but it's in the chapter before, and that's where he's sent away. But God says, "I'll take care of him," and he does. So it's an interesting, because that's a whole separate angle. But no, that story is not mentioned here in this chapter. So, and Abdul may be able to elucidate that a little bit. Abdul, brings to mind what we do at with Tri-Faith, which is, I think, wonderful, is when we come out of services on Rosh Hashanah, our partners in the Countryside Community Church and AMI are there with honey and apples so that to serve us, which is really lovely. I mean, it's just that they don't serve us, but they just have them, and we are able to mix with them. And just likewise at the end of Ramadan, the other two congregations bring dates, offer dates to our Muslim friends, and that's where Abdul always says, "We've had enough dates already. Bring us a hamburger." So Abdul, I'll make you a honey cake. But anyway, that's kind of funny. So and then at the end of Christmas services, we always give candy canes to our friends at Countryside Community Church. So it's kind of nice, or we get to participate in each other's holidays like that. The people love it. It's really wonderful. And the recipients love it as well. But I was just going to end with a couple things. This was, I think, let me see which rabbi this was. This was Rabbi Jonathan Romaine, who's from England, actually. And he says, he talks about being a traumatizing experience for Isaac. He says, but then so much of Genesis is difficult, tracing a series of dysfunctional families and involving murder, rape, incest, sodomy. Its strength is that it offers harsh realities, not sugary fantasies, challenging us both to emulate some aspects and avoid others. Thus, we admire Abraham's faith, but admitted his flaws. And what really counts is how we lead our lives as a result. I thought that was really beautiful. I'm just going to say one more thing that I thought was so terrific. This was, I heard Chief Justice Stephen Breyer was interviewed after his retirement. And he said he had when he had his bar mitzvah, his rabbi said to him, he was very nervous. He says, "You don't have to be Moses, Stephen. You just have to be the best Stephen Breyer you can be." And I believe he turned out to be the best one too. So it's sort of it follows in the same thing, that we don't have to be Moses, we don't have to be Abraham, but we are put to test, and we just need to lead our lives the best way we can. So. Anyone else has any other discussion or question? I'd love to chat about this some more. 14 people put things in chat. Let's see. Oh, Gary, not
Cheryl.
Gary, but
Hi.
with Gary.
Hi, I'm Cheryl, Gary's wife. I just want to say thank you for inviting me to be involved with this with Gary. It was very enlightening. And I hope this is not the last one that you offer to the community. I'd really be interested in hearing more about the whole Tri-Faith initiative and all the other programs and religion, mainly because I belong to the Faith Community Nursing, which was started by Ronette Sailors in Omaha. And we invite all denominations and of nurses in our group. So it's been very interesting and enlightening, and thank you.
Well, thank you. And yes, you are invited to all kinds of stuff at Tri-Faith. I'm sure we'll get you on the mailing list, right, Allie?
Absolutely. I'm going to put a link in the chat to where you can see all of our upcoming events. It's just trifaith.org/events.
I think I'm on the mailing list, I think.
Ah, great.
Great.
Well, thank you all for participating. I really, really love that, and for forgiving me for not being the best scholar in the world, but I do appreciate your comments and your participation. And I just want to. Well, we've got a couple minutes left. One of my neighbors is here. Keiko Terasaki. You don't have to speak Keiko, but I just think she told me this morning, she says, well, she read this passage in Japanese. She's Japanese. And I thought, wow, that's even harder than Hebrew. So I just was, I wondered if that was any different. I don't know if you want to say anything publicly, or if you want to tell me privately when you walk my dog. But I thought that would be, speaking of reading Hebrew, translation from English to Hebrew to Japanese would be a fascinating take on this. And I'm wondering if the story is the same.
The story was same, and I always wanted to know about this part seriously, because this is the hardest thing in the world, to sacrifice your own loved son or grandson or whatever. And I never have this kind of deep faith because it blocks me. I can't do that. And I can't really do believe whatever, I have to follow with what religion tells me to do or not to do. So I just still cannot really overcome with this feeling to completely believe in religion. I mean, I was baptized in Christian 40 years ago, 30 years ago, but I, really kept struggling. If I can really believe in that so hard, so deeply, if I have to, sacrifice my loved one or not, I can't. So that's why I'm kind of very interested in what, other people are saying, and I'm still probably keep struggling. But thank you for letting me join you.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I totally agree with you. I can't imagine doing that either. And so does that mean you're not faithful, or you're just leading the best life you want to lead? You should lead. So you're a good human being. And she walks my dog too. And looks like you have something there.
I was just going to say to Kyoko, I think we all struggle. And I don't think you need to worry about it. And like Lisa said, just lead a good life, and that's the best we can do. Because I think that if everybody would really admit it, we all struggle with our faith.
Thank you.
So you're just fine with that.
Well, this has all been a beautiful conclusion to a really wonderful hour. And now that it's 12:59, I want to make sure that we don't forget to take a moment to say thank you to everyone who joined us today. And thank you so much to Lisa Lewis, who put such wonderful and intentional effort into preparing for today's presentation and discussion. So thank you so much, Lisa, and thank you for putting up with Zoom and the technology side of that. I know I really appreciate that you were willing to take this on, and I think so many people really enjoyed hearing your perspective and getting to have a little bit of discussion. I loved seeing the respectful kind of pushing back and forth against each other that people were able to do in this conversation, just sharing those different perspectives. So thank you for making the space for that, Lisa, and thank you all for joining in that. It's been a really great hour, and don't forget to fill out our program survey to let us know what you thought of today's program. I put it in the chat one more time for you, and have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. We really appreciate you being here.
Yeah. Thank you.